They called her a fool for digging her own grave. The whispers started in Hemlock Ridge the moment Willa Thorne walked past the church with a burlap sack slung over one shoulder, and her father's leather journal pressed against her ribs like a shield. October 1917. The air had teeth. The wind coming down from the high peaks of the Appalachian Range carried the smell of snow that hadn't fallen yet but would. Soon. The kind of cold that didn't ask permission. It announced itself and waited for nothing. Willa was 15 years old. She had been an orphan for 13 months. The fever that took her mother and father in the terrible summer of 1916 had left her with three things. A memory of her father's calloused hands showing her how to read the grain in a piece of schist. A leather-bound journal filled with his careful script and stranger sketches. And the knowledge that the good people of Hemlock Ridge measured her value in bushels of potatoes she couldn't harvest and cords of wood she couldn't split. Her Aunt Ruth Thorne stood on the porch of the cabin that had once belonged to Willa's parents. Ruth's arms were crossed, not in anger, in arithmetic. She had done the calculations. Winter was 6 weeks away. The root cellar held enough for 2 people to survive until March. Maybe. There were 3 mouths now. The answer was simple and cruel and final. Ruth did not cry. She had buried 2 husbands and a stillborn son. Tears were currency she no longer spent. "There's a hard winter coming, girl," Ruth said. Her voice was flat as creek stones. "We've mouths enough to feed." Willa stood in the yard. The burlap sack contained a fire steel, a skinning knife with a loose handle, half a loaf of bread gone stale in the journal. Everything she owned in the world weighed less than 8 pounds. She nodded once. She did not argue. She had seen the way Ruth looked at her across the dinner table for the past 3 months. The quick calculations. The way her aunt's eyes lingered on the portion of salt pork on Willa's plate. She was a deficit. A mouth that ate but hands too small to earn the eating. Ruth turned and went inside without another word. The door did not slam. It closed with the soft click of a latch catching. A period at the end of a sentence. A ledger balanced. Willa shouldered the sack and walked. She did not look back. To look back was to invite the hope that the door might open again. That Ruth might call her name. That mercy might live in a world where it had proven itself extinct. She walked past the Brennan house with its fresh-cut timber, stacked 8 feet high against the coming freeze. Past the churchyard where her parents lay under matching stones. Past the general store where Silas Rutledge stood on the porch, his broad frame blocking the late afternoon sun. Silas was 52 years old. He owned the timber mill that kept Hemlock Ridge alive. He owned the land the mill stood on. He owned the company store where the mill workers bought their flour and nails on credit. He was not a cruel man. He was a certain man. He built things that stood. He trusted oak and iron and the logic of a square corner. He had no patience for deviation. He watched Willa pass. His face showed nothing. But his eyes followed her until she turned onto the north trail and disappeared into the tree line. The ridge people, the ones who had lived in these mountains for 3 and 4 generations, had a saying. The mountain keeps what the valley throws away. It was not a comfort. It was a warning. For 2 days, Willa walked. The north trail climbed. It followed deer runs and the ghost of an old logging road that had been abandoned before Willa was born. She ate the bread in small pieces, chewing each mouthful until it dissolved into paste. She drank from creeks that ran so cold they made her teeth ache. At night, she burrowed into piles of leaves, pulling them over herself like a blanket curling into a tight ball to keep what warmth her body made from escaping into the vast indifference of the dark. On the second night, she woke to the sound of something large moving through the brush. She lay perfectly still. Her hand found the knife. The blade was 4 inches of carbon steel worn thin by her father's sharpening stone. It would be useless against a bear, barely adequate against a wolf. The sound circled her twice and moved on. She did not sleep again that night. On the morning of the third day, cold and hollow and shaking, she opened the journal. Her father, Callum Thorne, had been a geologist. He had come to these mountains 20 years ago from a university back east. He had arrived with books and instruments and theories about orogenic uplift and Paleozoic subduction. The ridge people had taken one look at his clean hands and soft voice and decided he was a fool, a man who studied rocks instead of clearing them. A man who paid money for worthless stones when he could have bought good bottom land. They tolerated him because he married Iris Graymont, a local girl who could handle a rifle and knew which mushrooms would kill you. And because Callum never bothered anyone, he spent his days tapping at outcrops with a rock hammer. He filled notebooks with sketches and measurements. He taught his daughter to see the world not as a surface to stand on, but as a story written in layers of time. The ridge people thought he was harmless. They were wrong about that too. Willa sat on a fallen log and turned the journal's pages with numb fingers. She had looked through it before, after the funeral. But grief had blurred her vision then. She had seen only his handwriting, his voice trapped in ink. Now she looked with different eyes, the eyes of someone with nowhere to go and 6 weeks until the snow came to stay. The journal was not a scientist's casual field notes. It was a manual, page after page of detailed sketches. Cross-sections of hillsides with veins of quartz marked in red ink. Temperature gradients plotted on hand-drawn graphs. Calculations of thermal conductivity and heat retention in different types of stone. And there, 40 pages in a map. It showed the North Ridge. The landmarks were precise. A boulder split down the middle like a broken heart. 3 white birch trees growing from a single root mass. A stand of rhododendron that bloomed late even in good years. And at the center of these markers, drawn in careful detail, a crack in the granite face of the mountain. Beside the crack in her father's neat script, 2 words, Thermopylae Minor. Below that, the mountain breathes here. Willa's hands stopped shaking. She read the notes. Her father had found a geothermal vent, a fissure where warm air from deep in the earth escaped to the surface. The heat was generated miles below where the planet's mantle pressed against the ancient bedrock of the Appalachian core. Water trapped in the stone was superheated and rose through cracks in the granite, bringing warmth with it. A natural furnace that had been burning since before the mountains themselves were mountains. Before there were people to name them. Before cold was something that could kill you if you did not have fire. The next page showed a design. It was labeled Emergency Shelter Protocol. Her father had drawn a dwelling, not a cabin built on the earth, a chamber carved into it. The diagram showed a tunnel angled slightly upward to prevent water accumulation, widening into a circular room with the vent at the back. Measurements for minimum ceiling height, calculations for required air volume per person, notes on clay sealant for the walls, instructions for creating a smoke vent near the entrance for a small cooking fire. At the bottom of the page, in smaller writing, a note that made Willa's throat tight. For Willa. When the valley no longer wants you, the mountain will. Trust the stone. Trust the heat. Trust what I have shown you. You are smarter than they know. You are stronger than they believe. You are my daughter and you were born. Understanding that the earth keeps promises that people will not. Build this. Survive. Prove them wrong about everything. The journal shook in her hands, not from cold now, from something that felt like fury and hope tangled together into a knot behind her breastbone. He had known. Her father had known this would happen. He had known that when he was gone, Hemlock Ridge would cast her out. He had prepared for it the only way he could. With knowledge. With a map. With proof that there was another way to survive. She stood. She looked at the ridgeline to the north. 2 more miles, maybe 3. She started walking. The landmarks appeared one by one. The Heartstone first. A piece of granite the size of a wagon split perfectly down the middle by some ancient freeze and thaw cycle. The gap between the halves was wide enough to walk through. Willa paused there. She put her hand on the cold stone. It was solid, indifferent. It had been here for 10,000 years. It would be here for 10,000 more. It did not care if she lived or died, but it would tell her the truth if she knew how to listen. The birch grove came next. 3 trees, their white bark peeling in the autumn light, growing from a single massive root ball. The trees had bent away from each other as they grew, creating a perfect triangle of open space in the center. Willa stepped into that space and checked the journal map. From here, the vent was northeast, 100 yards, through the rhododendron thicket. The rhododendrons were old growth. Their trunks were thick as a man's leg. Their branches wove together into a canopy that blocked the sky. It was darker inside the thicket, colder. The ground was soft with decades of leaf fall. Willa pushed through the branches, catching at her dress and the sack. And then she saw it. The cliff face rose 30 feet above the thicket floor. Sheer granite, dark gray and slick with moss in the shaded places. And at the base, hidden behind a curtain of withered rhododendron leaves, a crack. A shadow in the stone. No wider than her hand. Easy to miss if you did not know to look. Willa knelt. The ground here was different. Bare. No leaves. No moss. Just exposed earth, dry despite the morning dew that coated everything else. She held her palm over the crack. At first, nothing. The stone was cold. The air was cold. Her hand was numb. She waited, and then she felt it. A presence, a movement in the air so subtle it was almost imagined. But it was there, warm, not hot, not a blast. A breath, steady, endless, rising from somewhere, so deep that sunlight had never touched it. She leaned closer, put her face near the crack. The air that touched her cheek was humid. It smelled of wet stone and minerals and time. It was warm enough that when she exhaled, her breath did not fog. The warmth was eating it. Willa sat back on her heels. Her heart was pounding, not from fear, from the sudden fierce certainty that her father had been right about everything. The mountain was breathing, and it was warm. She pulled the journal open to the shelter design, studied it. The tunnel would need to be 15 feet long to reach stable rock. The chamber would need to be 10 feet across to provide enough thermal mass. The entrance would need to slope upward to keep rain and snowmelt from flooding in. The work would be brutal. She had no tools except the knife, no experience except watching her father chip at rocks with his hammer. But she had this, a crack in the mountain, a promise of warmth, and absolutely nowhere else to go. She stood, looked at the cliff face, looked at her hands, small, soft, the hands of a girl who had never done a hard day's labor because her father had insisted she spend her time learning to read his geology texts instead of learning to can vegetables. She set the burlap sack down, took out the knife. It was a poor tool for digging, but it was the only one she had. She knelt at the crack and began to scrape. The first day she widened the crack by 2 inches. The work was slow and painful. The decomposed schist around the vent was soft enough to scrape away with the knife blade, but her hands blistered within an hour. The blisters burst. Her palms bled. She wrapped them in strips torn from the hem of her dress and kept digging. She dug until the light failed. Then she crawled into the shallow depression she had made and felt the warm air wash over her in the dark. It was not enough to be comfortable, but it was enough to keep her from freezing. She slept in fragments, woke every hour as the cold crept into her bones, dozed again, woke again. When dawn came, she ate 3 wild hickory nuts she had gathered the evening before and started digging again. On the 3rd day, a man appeared at the edge of the rhododendron thicket. He was old, 70 at least. His face was weathered to the color and texture of saddle leather. He wore buckskin pants and a wool coat that had been patched so many times the patches had patches. He carried a long rifle in the crook of one arm and watched Willa work for 5 full minutes before he spoke. "Girl," he said. His voice was rough. "What in the name of sense are you doing?" Willa sat back on her heels. She was covered in dirt. Her hands were wrapped in bloody cloth. She had lost weight she could not afford to lose. Her dress was torn. She looked like something that had crawled out of the ground instead of into it. "Digging," she said. The old man stepped closer. He peered at the crack, at the pile of excavated stone and earth, at Willa's raw hands. He knelt stiffly and held his own hand over the opening. His eyebrows rose. "I'll be damned," he said softly. "It's real." "You know about this?" Willa asked. "Know of it," the man said. "Never found it myself. But the old-timers used to talk. Said there were warm spots in these mountains, places the first settlers built their winter camps. Before the white man came with his log cabins and his iron stoves and his certain ways of doing things." He looked at Willa. "You're Callum Thorne's girl." "Yes, sir." "Amos Greystone," the man said. He did not offer his hand. He had seen the state of hers. "I used to trap this ridge. Still do sometimes when the winters get me restless and I need a reason to remember I'm still alive. He looked at the crack again. Your father showed me a map once, 6, 7 years back. Said he'd found something. Asked if I'd ever heard the old stories. I told him what I knew. Didn't think he'd actually found the damn thing. He found it, Willa said. And he left me the map. Amos studied her. His eyes were sharp despite his age. He took in the sack, the knife, the blood on her hands, the fierce, desperate set of her jaw. Where's your people? He asked. Don't have any. Town cast you out. It was not a question. Amos had lived long enough to know how these things went. Yes, sir. And you aim to live in a hole in the ground? I aim to live, Willa said. The hole is just where I'm going to do it. Amos was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once. A short, sharp movement like a man settling a private argument with himself. You'll need better tools, he said, and you'll starve before you finish if all you're eating is nuts. He reached into his coat and pulled out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. He set it on the ground between them. Willa unwrapped it. Smoked venison. A hard piece of cornbread. 3 apples that had started to wrinkle but were still good. I can't pay you, Willa said. Didn't ask you to. Amos stood. His knees cracked like green wood in a fire. I'll be back in 2 days. If you're still alive, I'll bring you a proper digging bar and a hand axe. If you're dead, well. At least you died trying something instead of waiting for charity that wasn't coming. He turned to go. Stopped. Looked back. Your father was a strange man, Amos said. But he wasn't a fool. People called him that because he saw things they didn't understand. Made them uncomfortable. They're gonna call you worse before this is over. I know, Willa said. Good, Amos said. Means you won't be surprised when it happens. He walked into the trees and was gone. Willa ate half the venison and 1 apple. She saved the rest. Then she went back to digging. Amos returned 2 days later with the tools he had promised. An iron digging bar 3 feet long and heavy as sin. A hand axe with a hickory handle. A coil of rope. And a small leather pouch that contained a fire steel, a whetstone, and a folded square of canvas. For when it rains, he said, nodding at the canvas. He also brought information. Silas Rutledge came by my cabin yesterday, Amos said. Asked if I'd seen you. I told him I hadn't. Wasn't a lie at the time. He said if I did see you, I should tell you there's work at the mill. Mucking out the saw pit. Mending grain sacks. A place by the fire in exchange for the labor. What did you say? Willa asked. I said I'd tell you if I saw you. That was a lie. Amos watched her. He thinks you'll be dead inside a week. Most of them do. There's a betting pool at the store. 3 to 1 odds you don't make it to the first snow. Willa's jaw tightened. She said nothing. The ones who don't think you'll die outright, Amos continued. Think you'll come crawling back. That you're making a show. Trying to shame them into taking you in. Ruth's been saying you're staging a performance. That you'll give up once you realize how hard it is. I'm not going back, Willa said. I know, Amos said, which is why I'm here. Because when you don't go back, when you don't die, they're gonna have to decide what that means. and some of them won't like the answer. He showed her how to use the digging bar, how to wedge it into cracks in the stone and laver chunks loose instead of scraping them away grain by grain. He showed her how to angle the tunnel upward just slightly, so water would not pool. He showed her which roots she could cut and which ones held the hillside together and should be left alone. He did not help her dig. He was too old for that kind of work. But he taught her how to do it right. Before he left, he looked at the journal still lying open on a flat stone. "That's quite a piece of work," he said, studying the shelter diagram. "Your father drew this." "Yes, sir." Amos nodded slowly. "He knew, didn't he? Knew what they'd do to you." "He knew," Willa said, "and he gave you a way out. A strange way. A way nobody else would think of. But a way." Amos looked at her. "You understand what you're doing here, girl. You're not just building a shelter. You're proving something. About him. About you. About everyone who said you couldn't." "I know," Willa said. "Good," Amos said. "Because they're going to fight you harder than the mountain ever will." For the next 2 weeks, Willa dug. She woke before dawn, ate sparingly, worked until her muscles screamed and her vision blurred, rested just long enough to stop shaking, worked again. The tunnel advanced inches at a time, then feet. The digging bar became an extension of her arms. The rhythm of the work became the rhythm of her heartbeat. Drive the bar into the crack. Lever. Feel the stone shift. Pry it loose. Drag it out. Stack it in the growing pile at the entrance. Her body transformed. The softness that came from a childhood spent reading books instead of hauling water disappeared. Her arms became corded with muscle. Her hands, once the hands of a girl who played piano in the church, became something else, calloused, hard. The blisters healed into thick pads of scar tissue. She learned to read the stone. The schist was soft and crumbled easily. The granite was hard, but fractured along predictable lines. The quartz veins were beautiful and useless, too hard to break with the tools she had. She dug around them. Every day the flow of warm air grew stronger. As the tunnel deepened, the temperature inside increased. By the end of the first week, she could work without her coat. By the end of the second week, she could sleep in the tunnel without freezing. The mountain was keeping its promise. On the 15th day, her digging bar struck something that was not stone. The impact rang hollow, not the thud of metal on rock. Something different. Willa crouched and scraped away the dirt with her hands. Her fingers found a surface that was too smooth, too regular. She worked faster, clearing the area around it. A stone, rectangular, about the size of her palm. But it had been worked, shaped. The surface was carved with marks, lines that crossed and recrossed in a pattern too deliberate to be natural. Willa sat back. Her heart was pounding. She turned the stone over. More marks on the other side, worn almost smooth by time, but still visible, deliberate. She dug further, found another stone, then another. They formed a rough wall, a structure. Someone had been here before, long before. They had built something, or tried to. The wall was only 4 stones high before it disappeared into the collapsed rubble of centuries. Amos had said the first people who lived in these mountains knew about the warm places. This was proof. Willa was not discovering something new. She was rediscovering something that had been forgotten. Knowledge that had been abandoned when the newcomers arrived with their certainty and their saws, and their refusal to listen to anything that contradicted what they already believed. She held one of the carved stones in her hands, felt the weight of it, the age. Someone had stood in this exact spot, maybe 100 years ago, maybe 500. They had felt the warm air. They had understood what it meant. They had tried to build something. And then they had left, or died, or been driven out by people who thought living in the earth was savage and wrong. Willa set the stone carefully to the side. She went back to digging. But something had changed. She was not alone in this anymore. She had company. The ghosts of everyone who had ever known that the mountain could keep you warm if you were brave enough to ask it. On the morning of the 16th day, Silas Rutledge found her. She heard him before she saw him. The crack of a branch, the sound of boots on stone. She backed out of the tunnel and stood blinking in the sudden brightness. Her eyes had adjusted to the dim light inside. The autumn sun felt harsh. Silas stood at the edge of the clearing. He was holding a rifle, but it was pointed at the ground. He was not hunting deer. He had been hunting her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Silas took in the scene. The pile of excavated stone and earth now taller than a man. The dark opening in the cliff face. Willa herself covered in dirt. Her dress in tatters, her hands wrapped in strips of cloth that were more blood than fabric. "Willa Thorne," Silas said finally. His voice was flat. "What in God's name are you doing? Digging?" she said. "I can see that." He walked closer, slowly, like approaching a wild animal that might bolt. "Digging what? A grave? A home?" Silas stopped. He stared at her like she had spoken in a language he did not know. Then he shook his head. A single sharp movement that conveyed more disappointment than 100 words could have. "Child," he said, "this isn't a home. This is madness." "It's warm," Willa said. Silas frowned. He stepped closer to the opening. Willa watched him, saw the exact moment when he felt it. The warm air. His expression changed. Confusion. Then suspicion. He knelt, held his hand over the crack the way she had done 16 days ago. His frown deepened. "What is this?" he asked. "Geothermal vent," Willa said. "Heat from deep in the earth. My father found it, mapped it, left me the instructions." Silas stood. He looked at her like she was something he had found under a rock, something he did not quite recognize but knew he did not like. "Your father," he said slowly, "filled your head with nonsense, rocks and measurements and theories that don't put food on the table or a roof over your head. This," he gestured at the tunnel, "this is what that nonsense leads to. A girl digging a hole in the ground because she's too proud to accept help." "I'm not proud," Willa said quietly. "I'm practical." "Practical?" Silas laughed. It was not a kind sound. "Practical would be taking the work I offered. A bed, a fire, food. Instead, you're out here playing cave dweller, and for what? So you can prove some dead man's theories right. He wasn't wrong, Willa said. He was wrong about everything that mattered. Silas's voice hardened. He was wrong about how to live in these mountains. He was wrong about what keeps a person alive through winter. And now his daughter is going to die because she believed him. Willa met his eyes. I'm still alive. For now, Silas said. But the real cold hasn't come yet. When it does, when the snow is 6 feet deep and the wind is howling and that little trickle of warm air isn't enough to keep you from freezing, what then? Then I'll still be here, Willa said. Silas studied her. There was something in his expression she could not read. Not quite pity, not quite anger. Something deeper and more complicated. I had a daughter once, he said quietly. Constance. She would have been 27 this year. She died when she was 17. Lung fever. Caught it in the winter of '07. I did everything right. Everything. Built her a good cabin. Kept the fire going day and night. Had the doctor come from 3 counties over. And she died anyway. His jaw tightened. I'm not going to watch another girl die in these mountains because she was too stubborn to listen to someone who knows better. Come back to town. Let me give you work. You'll earn your keep. You'll be warm. You'll be safe. I'm warm here, Willa said. You're delusional, Silas snapped. You're a child playing at survival with ideas you don't understand. That warm air you feel, that's cave damp. That's the breath of rot and mold. You sleep in there, you'll get lung fever, same as Constance did. That stone will collapse and bury you. The rain will flood you out. The freeze will kill you. This isn't a shelter. It's a tomb you're digging yourself into. He took a step closer. I'm offering you a test. 1 week. Come to town. Try to survive the way people actually survive. Build a fire. Trap game. Prove you can make it through a single week without this. He gestured at the tunnel. This fantasy your father left you. If you can do that, if you can prove you have the skills to actually survive, then maybe, I'll consider letting you stay out here. But I don't think you can. I think you'll fail. And when you fail, you'll come back, and I'll give you the work I offered, fair. Willa looked at him, at the certainty in his face, at the challenge. She thought about the journal, about her father's careful plans, about the warm air and the ancient stones, and the 2 weeks of brutal work that had transformed her hands into something that could grip iron and stone and not let go. She thought about saying no, about telling Silas Rutledge that she did not need his test or his approval. But she also thought about the winter coming, about the fact that she had never trapped an animal in her life, about the hard truth that Silas knew these mountains in ways her father never had. Callum Thorne had been a scientist. Silas was a survivor. 1 week, she said. 1 week, Silas agreed. Starting tomorrow, I'll bring you a trap, some snare wire. You'll build your own fire, catch your own food. No help from Amos or anyone else. Just you and the mountain, the way you claim you can do it. He turned to go, stopped, looked back. I'm not trying to break you, girl. I'm trying to save you. There's a difference. Then he walked into the trees and was gone. Willa stood alone in the clearing. She looked at the tunnel, at the pile of stone, at her bleeding hands. Tomorrow she would try to survive Silas Rutledge's way. She would fail. She already knew it. She had never set a trap, never built a fire that lasted through the night, never butchered game or knew which parts to eat and which to throw away. But she would try, because refusing the test would give Silas exactly what he expected: proof that she was too proud to learn, too stubborn to listen, too foolish to recognize wisdom when it was offered. She would fail his test, but she would learn from it, and then she would go back to digging, because the tunnel did not care about her pride. The warm air did not judge her. The mountain kept its promises whether Silas Rutledge believed in them or not. The test began at dawn. Silas arrived with the traps he had promised. 2 steel jaw traps for small game, a coil of snare wire, a small hatchet. He also brought a flint and steel, which he placed on a flat rock with the kind of deliberate care that said, "This is a gift I expect you to fail to use properly." "Rabbit run about 50 yards that way," he said, pointing east. "Set your snares there. Deadfalls won't work this time of year. The ground's too hard. You'll need to build a fire pit. Dig it a foot deep so the wind doesn't kill it. Bank it at night so the coals last till morning. You know how to do any of that?" "No, sir," Willa said. Silas nodded, like he had expected exactly that answer. "Then you'd better learn fast. 1 week. I'll check on you in 3 days. If you're still alive and fed, we'll talk again." He left without another word. Willa looked at the traps, at the wire, at the flint and steel. Her father had taught her about thermal conductivity and the crystalline structure of igneous rock. He had not taught her how to twist wire into a snare or convince wet kindling to burn. She spent the morning trying. The fire was the first disaster. She gathered wood, stripped bark for tinder, struck the flint against the steel the way she had seen Amos do it. Sparks flew, landed in the tinder, glowed, died. She tried again, and again, and again. By midday, her hands were cramping and she had produced exactly nothing except a pile of scorched bark and her own rising frustration. The snares were worse. She set them along the rabbit run, followed the instructions Silas had given her. Loop the wire, anchor it to a sapling, set it at the right height. She made 6 snares. They looked like the kind of thing a rabbit would see from 100 yards away and laugh at. By evening, she had no fire, no food, and no idea what she was doing wrong. She sat on a log and ate the last of the cornbread Amos had given her. It was gone in 4 bites. Her stomach growled. She ignored it. She had been hungry before. Hunger was an old companion. She could outlast it. The cold was different. As the sun set, the temperature dropped. Fast. She tried to start the fire again. Failed again. The darkness came, and with it a wind that cut through her torn dress like it was not there at all. She retreated to the tunnel, to the warm air. She slept there, curled against the back wall, where the heat was strongest. When morning came, she tried again. Day 2. The snares were empty. She rebuilt them, tried different positions, different heights. The fire finally caught on her 20th attempt, burned for exactly 11 minutes, and went out when a gust of wind hit it. Day 3. One snare had been tripped, but the wire had broken, and whatever had been caught had escaped. The fire lasted an hour before the wood ran out. She was out of food. She tried to eat the inner bark of a pine tree, the way she had read about in one of her father's books. It tasted like turpentine and made her gag. On the morning of day 4, Silas returned. He took one look at the cold fire pit, the empty snares, and Willa's gaunt face, and he nodded, not with satisfaction, with the grim confirmation of a man whose worst expectations had been met. "You're done," he said. "No," Willa said. "Yes." Silas's voice was firm. "You've proven my point. You don't have the skills. You don't have the knowledge. This isn't about pride anymore, Willa. This is about keeping you alive." "I'm alive right now," Willa said. "Barely. And only because you've been sleeping in that hole. Which proves my whole point. You can't survive the way people are meant to survive. You can only survive by hiding in the ground like an animal." "Then maybe that's the better way," Willa said quietly. Silas stared at her. "What?" Willa stood. Her legs were shaky, but she forced them to hold her weight. "You asked me to prove I could survive your way. I can't. You were right about that. I don't know how to trap or build fires that last. My father never taught me those things." She walked to the tunnel entrance. "But he taught me something else. Come here." Silas hesitated. Then he followed. Willa led him into the tunnel. It was deeper now, longer. The warm air was stronger. She had been working on it every night after failing at Silas's test during the day. The tunnel was now deep enough that 2 people could crouch inside without touching the walls. "Feel the walls," Willa said. Silas reached out, touched the stone. His expression changed. "It's warm," he said. "Not warm," Willa corrected. "Heated, by the constant flow of air from the vent. The stone is absorbing the heat, storing it. It's called thermal mass. My father explained it. Rock heats up slowly, but once it's warm, it stays warm. For hours, for days." She moved to the back of the tunnel, where the vent was strongest. "Your fire shouts its heat, loud and hot and fast. But the moment you stop feeding it, the heat dies. This," she gestured at the walls, "this whispers, quiet, constant, forever. The Earth's core has been hot for 4 billion years. It will be hot for 4 billion more. It doesn't need me to feed it wood. It doesn't care if I know how to set a trap. It just keeps burning." Silas was quiet. He ran his hand along the wall again, felt the steady, undeniable warmth. "And in winter," he asked, "when the snow is 6 feet deep and the wind is screaming and you're sealed in here, what then?" Willa pulled out her father's journal, opened it to a page near the back, a diagram showing airflow, calculations of carbon dioxide buildup, and ventilation rates. "The tunnel slopes up," she said. "Water drains out. Air flows in from the entrance and out through the vent. Natural circulation. I won't suffocate, I won't flood, and I won't freeze, because the heat is always there. Always. She looked at Silas. I failed your test. But will you try mine? What test? Silas asked. Come back tonight, Willa said. Bring 2 stones, equal size. Heat one in your cabin fire, the hottest part. Get it glowing if you can. Leave the other one in here, in the tunnel, right against this wall. Tomorrow morning we'll compare them. If your fire-heated stone is warmer, I'll come back to town. I'll take the work you offered. But if my stone is warmer, you leave me alone. Deal. Silas looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded once. Deal. That evening, Silas returned. He had 2 stones, pieces of granite each about the size of a man's fist. He showed them to Willa. Identical temperature, cold from sitting outside. He placed one against the back wall of the tunnel, where the warm air flowed constantly. He took the other with him. Tomorrow, he said. Dawn. Willa nodded. She did not sleep that night. She sat in the tunnel and listened to the soft hiss of the air from the vent. She thought about her father, about the hours he must have spent measuring and calculating and planning, about the fact that he had known she would need this, that he had loved her enough to give her a chance. Dawn came. Silas arrived exactly as the sun broke the horizon. He was carrying the stone from his fire. It was wrapped in a piece of leather to protect his hands. He set it down on a flat rock, unwrapped it. The stone was still warm. Willa could feel the heat radiating from it even standing 2 feet away. Then she went into the tunnel and retrieved the other stone, the one that had spent the night pressed against the wall. She brought it out into the light, set it next to Silas's stone. They both reached out at the same time, touched both stones, felt the difference. Silas's stone heated to glowing 12 hours ago. In the heart of his cabin fire was warm, a gentle warmth, fading. Willa's stone resting against a wall heated by an endless flow of geothermal air was warmer, noticeably warmer. And it would stay that way for hours, for days, for as long as it remained in contact with the heated rock. Silas stood. He looked at the stones, at the tunnel, at Willa. I'll be damned, he said softly. Does that mean I can stay? Willa asked. Silas did not answer right away. He picked up his stone, felt it cooling in his hands, the heat bleeding away into the morning air, dying. This doesn't prove you'll survive the winter, he said finally. No, Willa agreed. But it proves my father wasn't wrong, and it proves I'm not crazy for trying. Silas looked at her, really looked at her. Saw not a foolish child, but something else. Someone who had taken a wild idea and tested it, who had failed his practical test and responded not with excuses, but with evidence. Your father, Silas said slowly, taught you to think like a scientist. Hypothesis, experiment, proof. That's rare out here. Most people just do what their fathers did, what their grandfathers did. They don't ask why. They don't test. He set the stone down. I still think this is madness. I still think you're going to die out here. But I can't say you haven't thought it through. And I can't say the evidence isn't on your side." He turned to leave, paused. "I won't help you," he said, "but I won't stop you either. And I won't tell the town council to interfere. You want to try this, try it. But when the snow comes and the real cold sets in, if you change your mind, my offer stands. Work for shelter. No questions asked." "Thank you," Willa said. Silas shook his head. "Don't thank me. I'm not doing this because I think you're right. I'm doing this because I think you've earned the right to be wrong on your own terms." He walked away through the morning mist. Willa watched him go. Then she looked at the stones, at the proof. She picked up her father's journal, opened it to the next page, the one that showed how to widen the chamber, how to create niches for sleeping and storage, how to build a small clay oven near the entrance for cooking. She had passed the test. Not Silas's test, her own. And now the real work could begin. But Silas Rutledge was not done with her yet. He might have agreed to leave her alone, but the town council had not. 3 days later, Amos arrived at the tunnel site. He was breathing hard. He had run the last quarter mile. "Meeting," he said. "Town council. Tonight. They're voting on whether to force you back to town. For your own safety, they're calling it. Silas has been summoned to testify, and they want you there too." Willa's stomach tightened. "What do I do?" "You show up," Amos said. "You make your case, and you hope to God that stone trick was convincing enough. Because if they vote against you, they'll send men to drag you back. And there's nothing you or I can do about it." That evening, Willa walked into Hemlock Ridge for the first time in 3 weeks. The town hall was a single room with a potbelly stove and benches arranged in rows. It was full. Every family in the hollow had sent someone. They turned to look when Willa entered. She heard the whispers, saw the eyes taking in her torn dress, her scarred hands, her dirt-stained face. She looked like something wild. She knew it. She did not care. The council sat at a long table at the front. 5 men. Silas Rutledge was not among them. He stood to the side with the witnesses. The council chairman was a man named Thaddeus Polk. He owned the general store. He looked at Willa with the expression of a man who had already made up his mind and was only going through the motions of a fair hearing. "Willa Thorne," Polk said, "you've been summoned here to answer questions regarding your current living situation. The council has received reports that you are dwelling in unsafe conditions, specifically that you are living in a cave. Is this true?" "It's not a cave," Willa said. "It's a shelter. I built it." "You're 15 years old," Polk said. "You're not capable of building safe shelter. The council's position is that you are a danger to yourself. We have a responsibility to the community to prevent needless death. We're prepared to offer you placement with a family who will take you in. In exchange for light labor, you'll have food, warmth, and safety. All we're asking is that you accept this offer and abandon this foolish experiment." "No," Willa said. Murmurs ran through the room. Polk's expression hardened. "This is not a negotiation, child. The council has the authority to act in the best interests of minors without family. If you refuse our help, we can compel it." "On what grounds?" Willa asked. "On the grounds that you are living in conditions no human being should endure. We have testimony from Silas Rutledge that he found you starving and freezing, unable to care for yourself." Silas stepped forward. "That's not exactly what I said." Polk frowned. "You told this council that she failed basic survival tests, that she couldn't trap game or build fire." "That's true," Silas said. "But I also told you what happened after. The test with the stones. The proof that her shelter maintains heat better than a cabin fire. I said I thought she was going to die. I still think that. But I also said she'd earned the right to try." "You said she was delusional," Paul countered. "I said I thought she was," Silas corrected. "I'm not sure anymore." The room erupted, people shouting over each other. Polk banged a wooden gavel on the table. "Order. We'll have order." He looked at Silas. "You're changing your testimony." "I'm clarifying it," Silas said. "I don't understand how her shelter works, but I can't deny that it does work. The stone was warm. The science is sound even if I don't like it. And she's not asking for help. She's not asking for anything except to be left alone." "She's a child," Polk said. "She's a child who survived 3 weeks in the wilderness," Silas shot back. "How many adults in this room could say the same?" Silence. Polk's jaw worked. He looked at Willa. "The council votes," he said. "All in favor of compelling Miss Thorne to return to supervised housing say aye." "Aye," Polk said. 2 other council members echoed him. Opposed 2 voices. Nay, 3-2. The motion carried. Polk looked at Willa. "You have until tomorrow morning to collect your things and report to the Brennan house. Mrs. Brennan has agreed to take you in. If you're not there by noon, we'll send men to bring you back." Willa stood. Her heart was pounding. She had lost. The vote was against her. Tomorrow they would come. They would drag her back. They would put her in a house with a family that did not want her and make her work for charity she had never asked for. Unless... "I want to show you something," she said. Polk frowned. "The vote is final. You voted to compel me based on the belief that I'm living in unsafe conditions," Willa said. "But none of you have seen where I'm living. You're making a decision based on assumptions, not evidence." "We have Silas's testimony," Polk said. "Silas saw my shelter 3 weeks ago when it was barely started," Willa said. "It's different now. Better. If you're going to force me to leave, at least have the decency to see what you're forcing me to leave behind. Then vote again. If you still think I'm unsafe, I'll go. No argument." Polk looked at the other council members. They conferred in whispers. Finally, Polk nodded. "Tomorrow morning, the council will inspect your shelter. If it's as unsafe as we believe, you come back with us." "Agreed." "Agreed," Willa said. She walked out of the town hall into the cold night. Amos was waiting outside. "That was a gamble," he said. "I know," Willa said. "But it's the only card I have left to play." "Then you'd better make sure that tunnel is the most impressive thing they've ever seen," Amos said. "Because if it's not this time tomorrow, you'll be sleeping in the Brennan house, and you'll never get another chance." Willa walked back to the ridge in the dark. She did not sleep. She worked. She cleared debris from the entrance. She smoothed the walls. She carved a proper air channel near the entrance using the techniques her father's journal described. She built a small fire pit with the clay oven. She made the tunnel look not like a desperate hole scraped in desperation, but like a dwelling, planned, executed, functional. When dawn came, she sat at the entrance and waited. They arrived at mid-morning. All 5 council members, Silas, a dozen others who had come to watch. They stood at the clearing and stared at the tunnel entrance, at the pile of excavated stone now organized and stacked, at the canvas shelter Amos had given her, erected as a tool storage area. Polk stepped forward. "Show us." Willa led them to the entrance. One by one they crouched and entered. The tunnel was tight, but it was tall enough to move through without crawling. The walls were smooth, the floor was level, and the air was warm. They emerged into the chamber, 10 feet across, 7 feet high at the center. The walls curved gently. The floor was packed earth, dry and solid. At the back, the vent whispered its endless breath of warmth. The council members stood in silence, feeling the temperature, seeing the carved niches, the clay oven, the simple, undeniable functionality of it. Polk touched the wall. His hand lingered there, feeling the warmth soak into his palm. "How long will this heat last?" he asked. "Forever," Willa said. "As long as the Earth's core is molten, which will be longer than any of us will be alive to care." One of the council members, a man named Grady, shook his head. "This is unnatural. Living in the ground. It's not Christian." "What's unchristian about staying warm?" Amos asked from the entrance. He had followed them in. "Your Bible says God provides shelter. Doesn't specify what kind." Polk ignored him. He looked at Silas. "You've seen this before. What's your assessment?" Silas ran his hand along the wall. "I still think it's crazy, but it's not unsafe. The structure is sound. The air flows. It's warmer in here than in my own cabin. And she built it herself, with hand tools and a journal full of dead man's notes." He looked at Willa. "I wouldn't want to live here, but I can't say it doesn't work." Polk was silent for a long time. Then he sighed. "Council will vote outside," he said. They filed out. Willa stayed in the chamber, listening to the muffled voices, unable to hear the words, only the tone. Argument, debate, silence. Finally, footsteps. Polk appeared in the entrance. "The vote is 2-2, he said, "with 1 abstention, which means no majority, which means no action. You can stay." Willa felt her knees go weak. "Thank you." "Don't thank us," Polk said. "We're not helping you. We're just not stopping you. But understand this. When you die out here, and I believe you will, your blood is on your own hands, not ours. We offered help. You refused it. That absolves us of responsibility." He left. The others followed, all except Silas. He stood in the entrance, backlit by the morning sun, a dark silhouette. "You won," he said. "For now," Willa said. "For now," Silas agreed. "But winter's coming. And when it does, we'll see if that mountain of yours keeps its promises, or if your father was just a dreamer who got lucky with a map. He wasn't lucky, Willis said. He was right. Silas nodded slowly. Then I guess we'll find out which one of us knows these mountains better. Me with 20 years of experience, or a dead man with a journal, and a 15-year-old girl with bloody hands and a hole in the ground. He turned and walked away. Willa stood alone in her shelter, in the warmth, in the steady, undeniable proof that her father had not been a fool, that she was not crazy, that there was another way to survive. The mountain had made her a promise. She had kept her half of the bargain. She had dug. She had listened. She had trusted the heat. Now all she had to do was survive long enough to prove that trust was not misplaced. The first snow was 3 weeks away. The earth hearth was complete on the first day of November. Willa stood in the center of the chamber and turned in a slow circle, taking inventory. The ceiling was high enough that she could stand upright without her head brushing stone. The walls curved smooth, following the natural dome shape her father's diagrams had specified for maximum structural integrity. The floor was packed hard, sloped gently toward the entrance to prevent any water accumulation. At the back, the vent breathed its endless warmth into the space, and the rock walls had absorbed enough heat over the past 4 weeks that the entire chamber radiated a steady, gentle warmth that touched her skin from every direction at once. She had carved 3 niches into the walls, one for sleeping lined with the deer hides Amos had helped her cure, one for food storage elevated to keep vermin out, one for tools and the precious journal wrapped now in oilcloth to protect it from the humidity. Near the entrance, she had built a small cooking area. Clay bricks formed a simple oven with a chimney that angled up and out through a carefully constructed smoke hole. The draft from the vent pulled the smoke outside naturally. She did not need fire for heat, only for cooking, and even that would be minimal. The vent's warmth was enough to dry meat and warm water. It was not a palace. It was not even comfortable by the standards of the cabins down in Hemlock Ridge. But it was hers. She had built it with her own hands from nothing but stone and earth and the knowledge her father had left her. And it worked. God in heaven, it worked. The temperature in the chamber held steady at 68 degrees. She had measured it using a mercury thermometer from her father's old field kit. Outside, the November air was already dipping into the 30s at night. Inside, she could wear a simple cotton dress and be perfectly warm. The humidity from the vent kept the air from becoming desert dry like it did in Silas's cabin when his stove was roaring. Her skin did not crack. Her throat did not burn when she breathed. She was not fighting the mountain. She was living inside it, a guest in its ancient warmth. Amos visited that afternoon. He came bearing gifts, as he often did now. A rabbit he had snared, a small sack of cornmeal, 6 apples from a wild tree he knew about. "You're spoiling me," Willa said. "I'm keeping you fed so I can say I knew you when," Amos replied. He looked around the chamber with the eye of a man who had lived rough for 50 years and knew quality work when he saw it. "This is something, girl. This is really something." "It's what my father planned," Willa said. "Your father planned it," Amos agreed. "But you built it. There's a difference." He set the rabbit down on the flat stone Willa used as a work surface. "Mind if I sit? My knees are complaining about the walk up here. Please." Amos lowered himself onto the smooth stone floor with a grunt. He leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. Damn, that's warm. That's really warm. Thermal mass, Willa said. She had explained it to him before, but Amos liked to hear it again. He said it helped him understand what he was feeling. Tell me again, Amos said. Pretend I'm simple. Willa smiled. She sat across from him and pulled out her father's journal, opened it to the page with the thermal mass calculations. Most people think about heat as something that moves through air, she began. You build a fire, the hot air rises, it warms the room. But air is a terrible holder of heat. It warms up fast and cools down just as fast. That's why Silas's cabin is freezing 10 feet away from his stove. The air near the fire is hot, but it can't hold on to that heat long enough to spread it around. She tapped the stone wall beside her. Rock is different. Rock has mass, lots of it. It takes a long time to heat up rock. But once you do, it holds that heat for hours, days even. The scientific term is thermal capacity. How much energy something can store before its temperature changes. And this vent of yours, Amos said, eyes still closed. It's been heating this rock for how long? 4 weeks of constant flow, Willa said. Every hour of every day, warm air from deep in the earth has been washing over these walls, soaking into the stone. The rock is saturated with heat now. It's like a giant battery, storing energy. And in winter, Amos asked, when it's 20 below outside and the wind is trying to peel the skin off your face, the rock doesn't care, Willa said. It's insulated by tons of earth. The temperature down here is stable. The vent will keep flowing because it's driven by the heat of the Earth's core. And that's not going to cool down for another few billion years. The rock will stay warm. The chamber will stay warm. I'll stay warm. Amos opened his eyes. Your father was a smart man. He was, Willa said quietly. Smarter than the rest of us gave him credit for. Amos shifted, trying to find a more comfortable position. His joints popped. I've been thinking about something. Down in the hollow, Silas is organizing the winter preparation. Every family is stockpiling wood like the devil himself is coming. I saw the Brennan place yesterday. They've got timber stacked 12 feet high. Took 6 men 2 weeks to cut and haul it all. 6 men 2 weeks just to have enough fuel to keep one family warm for 3 months. That's how it's always been done, Willa said. That's my point, Amos said. It's how it's always been done. But it's not the only way. Is it? Willa looked at him, understanding what he was asking. No, it's not. What you've built here, Amos continued, it doesn't need fuel. It doesn't need 6 men working themselves half to death. It just needs the mountain, which is already there, already warm, already willing. Silas thinks I'm going to die, Willa said. Silas thinks everyone is going to die, unless they do exactly what he does, Amos said. He's not a bad man, but he's a certain man. And certainty makes a person blind to other possibilities. He struggled to his feet. I should go. Getting dark soon. But I'll be back in a few days. Bring you some news from town. What kind of news? The kind you need to hear, Amos said. Storm's coming. A big one. Old-timers are saying it's going to be bad. Worse than usual. The signs are all there. Animals moving early, ice forming on the creek before Thanksgiving. If they're right, and I think they are, then everything is about to be tested. Silas's way, your way. We'll see which one holds up. He paused at the entrance. I've lived through 42 winters in these mountains. I've seen cold that'll freeze a man solid in an hour. I've seen snow so deep it buried cabins to the roofline. And I'm telling you, girl, if what's coming is as bad as I think it is, your warm little cave here might just be the smartest thing anyone in this hollow has ever built. He disappeared into the twilight. Willa sat alone in her chamber and listened to the soft hiss of the vent. The mountain's breath, steady as a heartbeat. Down in Hemlock Ridge, the preparation was frantic. Willa could see it from the high trail when she went to gather water. The hollow was a hive of desperate activity. Men with axes and two-man saws working from dawn to dusk. The sound of chopping carried on the wind. Trees fell. Teams of horses dragged the logs to the mill. The saw screamed as it ripped timber into planks and firewood. Smoke rose from every chimney as families tested their stoves, checked their flues, made sure everything was ready. Silas Rutledge was everywhere, directing, organizing. His voice carried across the hollow like a general marshaling troops before battle. He had lived here longer than almost anyone. He had survived winters that killed weaker men. His method worked. His cabin stood. His people lived. He knew what was coming, and he knew how to meet it. With wood, with iron, with fire and sweat, and the certain knowledge that man conquered nature through work. Willa watched from a distance and felt a strange mix of emotions she could not quite name. Part of her wanted to prove him wrong, wanted the storm to come, and her warm chamber to stand while his cabin struggled. But another part of her, the part that remembered Constance Rutledge dying of lung fever, the part that knew Silas was trying to save lives, the only way he knew how, hoped he was right, hoped his method would work, hoped no one would die. She did not want to win by watching others lose. The weather changed on November 15th. The temperature dropped 20 degrees overnight. The sky turned a color Willa had never seen before. Not gray, not white. A bruised purple-yellow that looked diseased. The wind shifted from the north and carried a smell like iron and ice. The birds that had been singing in the mornings went silent. The squirrels disappeared into their dens and did not come out. The old-timers in Hemlock Ridge looked at that sky and knew this was not going to be an ordinary winter. This was going to be a reckoning. Willa secured her shelter. She brought in extra firewood for cooking, though she would barely need it. She filled every container she had with water from the creek before it froze solid. She checked the smoke vent to make sure it would not clog with snow. She sealed the entrance with the deer-hide door and a second layer of canvas. Not to keep warmth in. The mountain did that. But to keep wind and blowing snow out. Then she settled in to wait. The storm arrived on a Tuesday morning. Willa woke to silence. A silence so complete it felt like pressure against her eardrums. She pushed aside the high door and looked outside. The world had disappeared. Snow was falling so thick she could not see the trees 20 feet away. It was not falling in flakes. It was falling in a solid white curtain, vertical, relentless. No wind yet. just snow. Endless snow. The kind that did not stop until it had buried everything. Willa pulled the door closed and retreated into her chamber. Inside, nothing had changed. The temperature was still 68 degrees. The air was still humid and warm. The vent still breathed its ancient exhalation. She lit a small fire in her clay oven and made tea from pine needles. She ate dried berries and a piece of the rabbit Amos had brought. She sat on her sleeping platform and opened her father's journal to a random page. His handwriting looked back at her. Familiar. Comforting. Proof that she was not alone. That someone had believed this would work. She read his notes about crystalline structures in metamorphic rock, about the way pressure and heat could transform limestone into marble, about patience, about the slow work of geological time. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, Willa was warm and safe and completely unaware that down in Hemlock Ridge, everything was falling apart. The snow fell for 3 days without stopping. On the 4th day, the wind came. Willa heard it even through the tons of earth between her and the surface. A roar like a living thing. Angry. Hunting. The kind of wind that found every crack, every gap, every weakness in a structure and exploited it. The kind that turned snow into a weapon and cold into a blade. She stayed in her chamber. There was no reason to go out. She had everything she needed. Water, food, warmth, light from her tallow lamp, the journal to read, time to think, time to rest, time to let her body recover from the brutal work of the past 6 weeks. Her hands were healing. The deep calluses remained, but the open cracks had closed. Her muscles had stopped aching. She had gained back some of the weight she had lost. She felt for the first time since her parents died something like peace. The mountain had kept its promise. She was not fighting to survive anymore. She was simply living. On the evening of the 5th day, she heard something that did not belong. Voices, muffled by the snow and distance. But voices. Outside her shelter, Willa froze. No one should be out in this storm. No one could be. The snow had to be at least 4 feet deep by now. The wind was a howling nightmare. Traveling in this was suicide. The voices came closer, then a pounding on the canvas door. Willa, Willa Thorne, you in there? She recognized the voice. Amos. She pushed the door open. Snow cascaded in. Amos stood in the entrance covered in white, his beard a solid mask of ice. Behind him, barely visible through the blowing snow, another figure. Get inside, Willa said. Quickly. They stumbled in. Willa sealed the door behind them. Amos stood shaking, his whole body convulsing. The other person was a woman, young. Willa recognized her after a moment. Laurel Rutledge, Silas's daughter-in-law. What are you doing out there? Willa demanded. You could have died. We're dying anyway, Laurel said. Her voice was raw, desperate. Down in the hollow, everything is failing. The stoves can't keep up. The cabins are freezing. The children... Her voice broke. Amos had collapsed against the wall. He was feeling the warmth. His eyes were closed and his breathing was ragged. "Everett," Laurel said. "Silas's grandson. He's 8 years old. He has a cough. It started 3 days ago. Now it's in his lungs. He's burning up with fever, but he's shivering so hard his teeth are chattering. The stove is going full blast, but the cabin is so cold. The wind is coming through the walls. The chinking has cracked. We can't keep him warm." She grabbed Willa's arm. "Please, I know Silas said terrible things to you. I know the town voted to force you back. But Everett is a child. He's innocent. He's dying and we don't know what to do." Willa looked at Laurel's face, saw the terror there, the exhaustion, the desperation of a mother watching a child suffer. She thought about Constance Rutledge, the daughter Silas had lost, the girl who died of lung fever because her father's methods were not enough to save her. She thought about the vote, about being dragged before the council and told she was too foolish to survive, about Silas standing in this very chamber and saying her father had filled her head with nonsense. She could say no. She could tell Laurel that they had made their choice and now they had to live with it, that she owed them nothing, that Silas could save his own grandson the same way he had tried to save his daughter. With wood and fire and certainty, she could say no. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, "How bad is he?" "Bad," Laurel said. "Really bad. He needs warmth, constant warmth. Not the kind that comes and goes. The kind that stays. The kind that—" She looked around the chamber, at the warm walls, at the steady heat. "The kind you have here." Willa thought about her father's journal, about the note he had written. "When the valley no longer wants you, the mountain will. Trust the stone, but also prove them wrong about everything, not by watching them suffer, by showing them a better way." "I need to think," Willa said. "There's no time," Laurel said. "Every hour we wait." "I need to think," Willa repeated. Firm, not cruel, but final. Laurel's face crumpled, but she nodded. She understood. She had asked for mercy from someone who had every reason to deny it. She could not demand more. Amos had recovered enough to speak. "Silas doesn't know she's here," he said to Willa. "He thinks Laurel is at the Brennan house helping with their children. If he knew she came here, he'd what?" Willa asked. "He'd die of shame before he'd accept help from you," Amos said. "Pride is a hell of a thing." Willa sat down. She thought about Silas Rutledge, about the test he had given her, about the stones, about the moment when he had touched the warm granite and said, "I'll be damned," about the way he had defended her grudgingly to the council. He was not evil. He was just certain. And certainty had failed him. But his grandson was dying because of that certainty. A child who had never voted to exile her, who had never called her foolish, who was innocent of everything except being born into a family that believed there was only one way to survive. Willa made her decision. "I'll come," she said. Laurel's eyes went wide. "You will." "Not to the Hollow," Willa said. "I'll bring Everett here, and Silas, and anyone else who needs it, but I'm not leaving this shelter. And I'm not backing down. If Silas wants his grandson to live, he comes to me. In my father's shelter. In the place he called a tomb. he sees it work. He admits he was wrong. And then maybe we can talk about helping the others. He'll never agree, Laurel said. Then Everett dies, Willa said. The words were harsh, but her voice was not. It was sad, tired. I'm not trying to be cruel, Laurel, but I have to make Silas see, really see. Not just feel a warm stone, but see his grandson healed by the warmth he said would kill me. Otherwise, he learns nothing. And next winter, someone else dies. And the winter after that. And it never stops. Laurel was crying. Please, just come to the hollow. Save him there. You can prove yourself later. I can't save him there, Willa said. His cabin is a sieve. The heat is bleeding out faster than any fire can replace it. You know it. That's why you came here. She stood, looked Laurel in the eyes. Bring him here. Bring Silas. I'll save Everett. But Silas has to see how. He has to understand, or nothing changes. Amos struggled to his feet. I'll go with her. Help her get the boy up here. But Willa, you need to understand what you're asking. Silas will have to carry his dying grandson a mile through a blizzard, to a place he said was dangerous, to be saved by a girl he tried to prove wrong. That's not just asking for help. That's asking him to destroy everything he believes about himself. I know, Willa said, but his grandson is more important than his pride. Isn't he? Amos looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. You're your father's daughter. He'd be proud and terrified. Because what you're doing is either going to save this community or split it in half. It's already split, Willa said. I'm just asking Silas to pick which side of the crack he wants to be on. They left, back into the storm. Willa watched them disappear into the white and then closed the door. She sat in her warm chamber and waited. Either they would come, or they would not. Either Silas's love for his grandson would be stronger than his pride, or it would not. She had made her offer. She could do nothing else. 6 hours later, she heard them coming, the sound of labored breathing, boots crunching through deep snow. A man's voice, low and steady, talking to a child. Encouraging. Comforting. Willa opened the door. Silas Rutledge stood in the entrance. He was carrying Everett in his arms. The boy was wrapped in blankets, only his face visible. His skin was gray. His breathing was a horrible, wet rattle. Behind Silas, Laurel and Amos struggled through the drifts. Silas looked at Willa. His face was a mask, frozen, exhausted, defeated. But his eyes were alive with something that looked like desperation and fury tangled together. My grandson is dying, he said. I know, Willa said. You said you could help him. I can. Here. Silas looked past her into the chamber, at the impossible warmth radiating from the opening. In this hole, yes. Silas stood there. The wind howled behind him. Snow whipped around his shoulders. Everett coughed, a deep, tearing sound that shook his small body. You want me to beg, Silas said. Is that it? You want me on my knees? No, Willa said quietly. I want you to see. She stepped back, opened the door wide, let the warmth pour out into the freezing night. Bring him in, she said. Save him, and then we'll talk about what comes next. Silas hesitated for one more second. Then he stepped through the entrance. The moment he crossed the threshold, his expression changed. Willa watched it happen. The cold fury in his eyes flickered, then dimmed, then was replaced by something else. Shock, confusion, and finally, slowly understanding. He stood in the center of the chamber, holding his grandson, feeling the warmth wash over them both. A warmth that did not come from fire, that did not roar or demand fuel, that simply existed, constant, gentle, eternal. What is this? He whispered. It's what my father tried to tell you, Willa said. The mountain doesn't fight you if you know how to listen. Silas looked around, at the smooth walls, at the carved niches, at the vent in the back, breathing its ancient warmth, at Willa herself standing in a cotton dress in comfort, while outside the worst storm in a generation tried to kill everything it touched. He looked down at Everett, at the child's gray face, at the labored breathing. Then he looked at Willa. How long has it been like this? He asked. This warm. 4 weeks, Willa said. Since I finished the chamber. It doesn't change, doesn't waver. The temperature stays between 65 and 70 degrees, no matter what's happening outside. That's impossible. You're standing in it, Willa said. Laurel pushed past them. Everett needs to lie down. Where can I? The sleeping niche, Willa said, pointing. It's the warmest spot, right against the back wall near the vent. Laurel took Everett from Silas's arms and carried him to the niche. She laid him down on the deer-hide bedding, pulled the blankets around him. The boy coughed again, but the sound was slightly different. Not better yet, but not worse. Silas stood frozen, watching. His hands were still raised as if holding the child. He looked like a man whose entire world had just shifted under his feet, and he was trying to find balance. Amos came in last. He sealed the door behind him and leaned against it, breathing hard. Made it, he said. Then he looked at Silas. You all right? Silas did not answer. He walked to the wall, placed both palms flat against the stone, felt the warmth, pressed harder as if trying to push through the rock to find the source, find the trick, find the lie. But there was no lie. The stone was warm. The heat was real. Everything Willa had said was true. He turned and looked at her. Really looked at her. Saw not a foolish child, but someone who had built something he could not understand. Who had succeeded where he had been certain she would fail. How? He asked. His voice was rough, raw. Willa picked up her father's journal, walked to him, opened it to the page with the thermal mass calculations. Sit, she said, and I'll teach you what my father taught me. For the next hour, while Everett slept fitfully in the warm darkness and Laurel kept vigil beside him, Willa explained. She showed Silas the diagrams, the calculations, the principles of heat transfer and thermal capacity. She explained convection versus radiation. She showed him how the vent worked, how the warm air rose from deep in the earth through fissures in the granite, how the rock absorbed that heat slowly over days and weeks until every square inch of the chamber walls had become a gentle radiator. She explained why his cabin failed, not because he had built it wrong, but because wood was a poor insulator, because log walls were full of tiny gaps that let heat escape, because his stove worked by convection heating air that rose uselessly to the ceiling while the floor stayed freezing. She explained that she was not fighting the cold. She was avoiding it entirely, living in a space where the cold could not reach, where the ancient heat of the Earth's formation was still radiating outward and would continue to radiate for millions of years after everyone currently alive was dust. Silas listened. He did not interrupt. He did not argue. He followed her finger as it traced the diagrams. He nodded when she explained a calculation. He asked questions when he did not understand, and slowly Willa watched his certainty crumble. Watched the man who had been so sure of his methods confront the undeniable evidence that there was another way. A better way. A way he had never considered because it contradicted everything he had been taught. Finally, he set the journal down. He looked at the sleeping boy, at his daughter-in-law keeping watch, at the warm walls that were doing what his expensive stove and 12-foot-high woodpile could not. "My daughter died of lung fever," he said quietly. 10 years ago. I built her the best cabin I knew how to build, kept the fire going day and night, had the doctor come, did everything right. His voice cracked. "And she died anyway." "I know," Willa said. "You know what I thought?" After she was gone, Silas looked at her. His eyes were wet. "I thought I hadn't done enough, that I should have cut more wood, built a bigger fire, chinked the logs tighter. I thought if I had just worked harder, been more prepared, she would have lived. So I spent the next 10 years making sure I was ready, making sure I knew more than anyone else, making sure my methods were proven and tested and absolutely certain." He laughed, a broken sound. "And here you are, 15 years old, living in a hole in the ground with nothing but your dead father's notes. And you're warmer than I've ever been in my life." "It's not a competition," Willa said. "Isn't it?" Silas asked. "Isn't that exactly what it is? My way against your way. My knowledge against your father's. And you won. A child with a journal beat a man with 40 years of experience." "I didn't win," Willa said. "I survived." "There's a difference." "Is there?" Silas stood, walked to the vent, held his hand over the opening, felt the steady, endless breath of warmth. "I called this a tomb. I told the whole council it would collapse and bury you. I was so certain, so damn certain." He turned, looked at Willa. "I was wrong." The words hung in the warm air, simple, devastating. "I was wrong," Silas repeated. "About you, about your father, about everything. And my grandson is alive right now, because you were right, and I wasn't." "He's not alive yet," Willa said. "The fever hasn't broken." "But it will," Silas said. "Won't it? In this warmth, this constant, steady warmth. It will break, because this is what he needed, what Constance needed, what I was too blind to see. He walked to Everett, knelt beside the sleeping platform, put his hand on the boy's forehead, still hot. But the color in his face was better. The breathing was easier. The constant, gentle warmth of the chamber was doing its work. Silas bowed his head. His shoulders shook. Willa looked away, gave him privacy for his grief, for the breaking of certainty, for the moment when a man confronts the fact that everything he believed was incomplete and his stubbornness had cost lives. Amos stood and walked to Willa. He spoke quietly. "You did a hard thing tonight, forcing him to come here, to see this, to admit he was wrong." "I didn't do it to hurt him," Willa said. "I know," Amos said. "You did it to save the boy, but also to save all the others. Because if Silas can change his mind, if he can admit there's another way, then maybe the whole community can. Maybe next winter fewer children die. Maybe in 5 winters nobody dies. You're not just saving Everett tonight. You're saving everyone who comes after." "Or I'm splitting the community in half," Willis said. "Like you said." "Maybe," Amos agreed. "But sometimes things have to break before they can heal." They stayed for 3 days. The storm raged outside. Inside the earth hearth, time moved differently, slower, quieter. Everett's fever broke on the 2nd night. He woke on the 3rd morning and asked for water. His voice was weak but clear. The rattle in his chest was gone. Laurel wept. She held her son and cried until she had no tears left. Then she looked at Willa and said, "Thank you. I don't have words for what you've done. But thank you." Silas said nothing, but he watched Willa constantly, studying her, trying to understand how a 15-year-old girl could have built something he could not have imagined, trying to reconcile the evidence before his eyes with the beliefs he had held for 40 years. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the wind stopped. The sudden silence was shocking. Amos opened the door and looked out. The snow had stopped falling. The sky was clearing. The world outside was buried under 6 feet of white. But the storm was over. "We should go," Laurel said. "Let people know we're alive." "Go," Willa said. "But leave Everett here 1 more day. Let him get stronger. The journey back will be hard. Better if he's fully recovered." Laurel looked at Silas. He nodded. "We'll come back tomorrow," Silas said. "With help. To carry him home." He looked at Willa. Seemed like he wanted to say something. Struggled with it. "Finally managed. Your father would be proud of you." "I know," Willa said. Silas and Laurel left. Amos stayed behind. He sat with Everett and told the boy stories about hunting bears and tracking wolves. Willa sat in her usual spot and watched the child laugh at Amos's tall tales. This was what her father had wanted. Not just survival, but life, warmth, safety. Proof that there was another way. She had built his design. She had trusted his science. And it had worked. But the real test was just beginning. Because tomorrow Silas would go back to Hemlock Ridge. He would tell the story of what happened here. And the community would have to decide. Were they going to change, or were they going to cling to the old ways even after those ways had proven inadequate? Willa did not know the answer. But she knew this: she had done what her father asked. She had built the shelter. She had survived. She had proven them wrong. The rest was up to them. The next day, Silas returned with 4 men. They came to carry Everett home. But they also came to see. Word had spread through the hollow. Silas Rutledge, the man who knew more about surviving mountain winters than anyone alive, had taken his dying grandson to Willa Thorne's earth burrow. And the boy had lived. The men stood in the chamber and stared. They touched the walls. They felt the warmth. They asked questions. How does it work? How long has it been like this? How much wood does it burn, None? Willa told them. It doesn't burn anything. It just exists. They looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language. But they could not deny what they felt. The proof was in their hands, in the sweat forming on their foreheads despite the 6 feet of snow outside, in the fact that Everett Rutledge was sitting up and eating dried apples and looking healthier than he had in a week. One of the men, a logger named Garrett, shook his head slowly. I've been breaking my back cutting firewood for 20 years. Every winter the same thing. Cut, haul, stack, burn. Cut, haul, stack, burn. And you're telling me there's a way to stay warm without any of that? Not everywhere, Willa said. Only where there are geothermal vents, places where the Earth's heat reaches the surface. They're rare, but they exist. My father found this one. There might be others in these mountains. And if there aren't, Garrett asked, what about the rest of us? Willa pulled out the journal, showed him the pages about insulation, about earth berms, about using the stable temperature of the ground itself to moderate the wild swings of surface air temperature. There are other ways, not as good as a vent, but better than what you're doing now. My father wrote about all of them. The men gathered around the journal. They looked at the diagrams with the confusion of men who worked with their hands, but had never been taught to read technical drawings. But they tried. They wanted to understand. Silas stood apart, watching. His face was unreadable. Finally, one of the men asked the question Willa had been waiting for. Would you teach us, help us build something like this? Willa looked at Silas, waited. He met her eyes, and slowly he nodded. She'll teach you, Silas said, and I'll help her, because what she's built here is the future, and I'm done pretending the past is good enough. The words settled over the chamber like snow, quiet, final. The men looked at each other, then at Silas, the man who had led them for 20 years, who had taught them everything they knew about surviving these mountains. And he was saying that everything was about to change. They picked up Everett, bundled him in blankets, started the journey back to the hollow. Silas was the last to leave. He paused at the entrance. I'm calling a council meeting, he said. Tomorrow night. I'm going to tell them everything about this place, about what it means, about the fact that we've been doing things the hard way for generations, when there was an easier way right under our feet. They won't want to hear it, Willa said. No, Silas agreed. They won't. But they're going to hear it anyway. And then they're going to have to decide. Change or stay the same. Learn or die stubborn. He looked at her one more time. You're invited. As the expert. Come and show them what you showed me. And if they vote against it, Willa asked, like they voted to force me back to town, then I'll resign from the council, Silas said, and I'll help you build these shelters for anyone who wants them, with or without the council's blessing. He left. Willa stood in her chamber, alone again. The vent breathed. The walls radiated their endless warmth. Outside, the world was frozen and hostile. Inside, she was safe. But safety was not enough anymore. Her father had not left her this knowledge just so she could survive. He had left it so she could teach. So she could change things. So the next girl who lost her parents would not be cast out to die because the community only knew one way to live. Tomorrow night she would stand before the council again. But this time she would not be defending herself. She would be offering them a choice. Learn from her. Or learn from the next winter that killed their children. She hoped they would choose wisely. But she knew that wisdom often came too late. After the suffering. After the loss. After the price had been paid. The storm was over. The real test was just beginning. The council meeting was set for 7 o'clock on a Friday evening. By 6:30, the town hall was packed. Every bench was full. People stood along the walls. They crowded in the doorway. Word had spread through Hemlock Ridge like wildfire. Silas Rutledge was going to make an announcement. Something about the Thorn Girl. Something that would change everything. Willa arrived exactly at 7. She carried her father's journal wrapped in oilcloth under one arm. She wore the same torn dress she had worn the day Ruth cast her out. She had not changed it deliberately. She wanted them to see what she had been. What they had forced her to become. What she had survived despite their certainty that she would not. The crowd parted as she walked through. No one spoke to her. But the silence was different than before. It was not the silence of dismissal. It was the silence of uncertainty. Of people who had heard rumors and did not know what to believe. Silas stood at the front of the hall. He wore clean clothes. His beard was trimmed. He looked like a man who had prepared carefully for something important. When he saw Willa, he nodded once, a gesture of recognition, of respect. The council sat at their table. Thaddeus Polk presided. He looked irritated. He had not wanted this meeting. But Silas had called it, and Silas owned half the valley. When a man with that much influence demanded to speak, the council listened. Polk banged his gavel. Meeting called to order. Silas Rutledge has requested time to address the council and community. You have the floor, Silas. Silas stood. He did not look at notes. He looked at the faces of the people he had lived among for 30 years. People he had worked beside, taught, led. People who trusted him. A week ago, he began. My grandson Everett was dying, lung fever. Same thing that took my daughter Constance 10 years back. I had him in my cabin. Best cabin I ever built. Stove going full blast. Every comfort I could provide. And he was dying anyway. The cold was winning. Same way it won with Constance. Same way it wins every winter with someone's child or elder or loved one. He paused. Let the words settle. Everyone in the room knew someone who had died from winter sickness. Everyone. My daughter-in-law, Laurel. She went to Willa Thorne, begged her for help. I didn't know about it until she came back and said Willa would help. But only if we brought Everett to her shelter, up on the ridge, in the place I had called a tomb. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Polk frowned. We all know where this is going, Silas. You're going to tell us the girl saved your grandson, and we should all be grateful. Is that the speech? No, Silas said. That's not the speech. He walked to the center of the room, turned so he could address everyone at once. I carried Everett through the worst blizzard I've ever seen, a mile through snow up to my chest. I expected to find exactly what I'd predicted: a collapsed hole, a frozen girl. Proof that my way was right and hers was foolish. Instead, I found a miracle. Miracles don't exist, Polk said. Then explain this. Silas gestured to Willa. Show them. Willa stood. She unwrapped the journal, opened it to a page of temperature measurements she had recorded over the past month. She had known this moment would come. She had prepared. November 1st through December 10th, she read. Outside temperature range 12 degrees to 38 degrees. Inside my shelter 65 to 69 degrees. Constant. No fire except for cooking. No fuel consumption. No wood hauling, no smoke. Just warmth. Steady and endless. She looked up at the council. Mr. Rutledge's cabin, same period. Outside temperature, same range. Inside temperature, 48 to 72 degrees, depending on proximity to stove. Fuel consumption, 2 cords of oak per week. That's 8 cords in a month. Do you know how much labor that represents? How many man-hours of cutting and hauling and splitting? Wood is how we survive, Polk said. It's how we've always survived. Wood is how you've barely survived, Willa corrected. At massive cost, breaking your backs, spending half your waking hours just gathering fuel to stay warm. And still children die. Every winter. Lung fever, freezing, accidents from overworked stoves. She walked forward, set the journal on the council table. My father found a better way. He mapped it, calculated it, left me the instructions. And it works. Everett Rutledge is alive because of it. He's alive because constant warmth healed him. Not fire, not wood. Just the steady heat of the earth itself. The room erupted, voices shouting over each other. Some calling her a liar, others demanding to see proof, others asking questions about how it worked and whether it could work for them. Polk banged the gavel until the noise died down. Even if what you say is true, he said to Willa, it only works for you, because you happen to have found some warm spot in the ground. That doesn't help the rest of us. It helps anyone willing to learn, Willa said. My father's journal doesn't just describe my shelter. It describes principles. Insulation, thermal mass, earth coupling. Ways to use the ground's stable temperature to moderate the extremes of air temperature. Not every family needs a geothermal vent, but every family can build better than they're building now. She opened the journal to a different page. A diagram showing an earth-bermed cabin, half buried in the hillside. The earth itself providing insulation and thermal stability. This takes more labor up front, Willa said, but less labor forever after. You dig into the hillside. You build your cabin with one wall against the earth. The ground stays at 50 degrees year-round at depth. In winter, 50 degrees is warmer than the air. In summer, it's cooler. The earth moderates. You still need a stove, but you need less wood, maybe half as much. And the temperature swings are gentler, safer for the sick, safer for children. A man in the back stood, Garrett, the logger who had come to carry Everett home. I've seen her shelter. I put my hand on the walls. It's real. Whatever she's saying about the science, the warmth is real. Others who had been there nodded, confirmed it. Polk looked frustrated. He was losing control of the meeting. This is madness. You're asking us to abandon proven methods for untested theories from a dead man's notebook. The theories are tested, Silas said quietly. I tested them. The stone experiment, the temperature measurements, the fact that my grandson is alive. All of that is evidence, real evidence, not tradition, not the way we've always done it. Evidence. He walked to the council table, looked Polk in the eyes. I was wrong, Silas said. About Willa, about her father, about everything. I spent 10 years thinking I wasn't good enough to save Constance, that I should have worked harder, built better. But the truth is I was using the wrong methods, the methods we've all been using. And those methods kill people, slowly, expensively. But they kill just the same. His voice grew harder. I'm not standing here asking you to believe me. I'm telling you what I know. We can keep doing what we've always done. And next winter, someone else will bury a child. Or we can learn. We can change. We can build better, smarter. We can use what Willa's father discovered and what Willa proved works. And if we refuse, Polk asked. Then I resign from this council, Silas said, and I help anyone who wants to learn, with or without your blessing. The room went silent. Silas Rutledge was the spine of Hemlock Ridge. Losing him would fracture the community's leadership. Everyone knew it. Polk's jaw worked. He looked at the other council members, saw uncertainty in their faces. They had not expected this, had not expected Silas to break ranks so completely. We'll vote, Polk said finally. Motion on the floor, the council formally recognizes Willa Thorne as a technical consultant to the community. She will be permitted to teach her methods to any family that requests instruction. The council will neither endorse nor prohibit her work. All in favor. 3 hands rose, including one that surprised everyone. Polk's own hand. He saw the shocked faces and shrugged. I'm a practical man. If Rutledge says it works, it probably works. I don't have to like it. Motion carries, Polk said. Miss Thorne, you have the council's permission to teach. God help us all if you're wrong. I'm not wrong, Willa said quietly. My father wasn't wrong, and anyone who learns will see that. The meeting dissolved into dozens of smaller conversations, families gathering to argue, some convinced, some skeptical, some willing to try anything if it meant less work and more warmth. Willa stood in the center of it all, holding her father's journal, the proof that knowledge could survive death. that one man's careful observation and planning could save lives years after he was gone. Silas approached her. He held out his hand. Willa looked at it, then took it. His grip was firm, respectful. "Your father would be proud," he said again. "You said that before," Willa replied. "It's still true." Silas released her hand. "Starting tomorrow, I'm at your disposal. You design, I build. Together, we're going to transform this valley." Together, Willa agreed. That night, alone in her shelter, Willa could not sleep. The weight of what was coming pressed on her. 18 families had already approached her, asking for help, asking for plans, asking her to teach them what her father had known. She was 15 years old, an orphan, a girl who 6 weeks ago had been cast out to die. And now she was expected to lead a transformation of the way an entire community lived. The responsibility was crushing. What if she made a mistake? What if her father's designs did not work for everyone? What if someone died because they trusted her, and she failed them? She pulled out the journal, held it like a lifeline, opened it to a random page, seeking comfort, seeking guidance. And there, tucked between 2 pages, she had read 100 times, she found something new, an envelope, yellow with age, sealed with wax. Her name written on the front in her father's careful script. Her hands shook as she broke the seal. Inside was a letter, dated April 1916, 4 months before the fever took him. "My dearest Willa," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone. And if you are reading this here in the shelter I designed, then everything I feared has come to pass. Your mother and I are dead. The community has cast you out. And you have done what I hoped you would have the courage to do. You have built what I could only draw. You have survived what I knew was coming. I am so very proud of you. I knew this would happen, you see. I knew that when I was gone, Hemlock Ridge would measure you against their needs and find you wanting. It is not cruelty. It is mathematics. They are good people trapped in a hard place with limited resources. You were a mouth to feed who could not earn the feeding. They would make the calculation, and you would lose. So I prepared. Everything in this journal is for you, not for them. For you. The maps, the diagrams, the calculations. I spent 10 years gathering this knowledge, testing it, proving it, all so that when this day came, you would have a chance. But survival is not enough, my darling girl. I did not give you this knowledge just so you could live alone in the mountain. I gave it to you so you could teach. They will reject you at first. They rejected me. They will call you foolish. They will pity you. They will wait for you to fail. Let them wait. Let them watch. And when they have failed in their own way, when their methods have proven inadequate once again, they will come to you. And you will teach them, not because they deserve it. Some do not. But because the knowledge itself deserves to survive. Because the next girl who loses her parents should not have to dig a shelter with bleeding hands. She should have a community that already knows how to build warm, safe places. That already understands the earth can be a partner instead of an enemy. You will be afraid. You will doubt yourself. You will wonder if you are capable of teaching men 3 times your age. You are. You are my daughter. You were born understanding that the world is not what it appears to be. That truth hides in stone and soil, and the patient observation of what is, rather than what we wish to be. Build it, survive it, then teach them. They will only listen after they have failed, after their certainty has cracked, after they have no choice but to admit there might be another way. And then, my brilliant girl, you will show them that way. I love you. I am sorry I could not protect you from what is coming. But I have given you the tools to protect yourself. And more than that, I have given you the tools to protect others. Use them well. Your father, Callum Thorne. Willa read the letter 3 times. Then she pressed it to her chest and wept. Great silent sobs that shook her whole body, not from grief, from relief, from the crushing weight of knowing she was not alone, that her father had known, had planned, had believed in her enough to leave her not just survival, but purpose. She had thought the journal was a gift. It was more than that. It was a mission. Build it. Survive it. Teach them. She had done the first 2. Now the third began. When spring came to Hemlock Ridge, the transformation started. Silas became Willa's right hand. He organized the work crews, directed the labor. But he did it under her instruction. She designed. He built. The relationship was clear to everyone. The knowledge came from her. The execution came from him. They started with the families most desperate, the ones who had nearly lost children in the winter, the ones whose cabins had failed worst. 18 families in the first year. Willa taught them earth berming, how to dig into hillsides, how to pack soil against cabin walls for insulation, how to create thermal mass using stone floors and walls, how to orient buildings to maximize southern sun exposure in winter, how to ventilate properly so moisture did not accumulate and breed sickness. The work was brutal. Digging into hillsides, moving tons of earth, rebuilding cabins that had stood for 20 years. But the families did it because they had seen Everett Rutledge alive and healthy, because they had seen Willa's shelter, because Silas Rutledge himself was working beside them, following a 15-year-old girl's instructions. And if Silas could swallow his pride, then so could they. Amos became the other instructor. He taught the old ways, the forgotten knowledge from the mountain's first inhabitants, how to read weather signs, how to find water, how to work with the land instead of against it. Where Willa taught the science, Amos taught the craft. Together they were formidable. By summer, the first modified cabins were complete. Families moved back into structures that looked similar from the outside but were radically different inside. Half buried, earth sheltered, insulated by the living hillside itself. Willa insisted on measurements. Every family kept temperature logs, fuel consumption records. She collected the data, compared it, proved with numbers what everyone could feel. The new designs used half the wood. The temperatures were more stable. The sick recovered faster. Word spread beyond Hemlock Ridge. By autumn, people from neighboring valleys were coming to see, to ask questions, to request help. Willa was 16 years old. She had survived one winter in her earth hearth. She had saved a child's life. She had transformed her own community. And now other communities wanted what she had built. She could not help them all. She was still one person, still learning, still making mistakes and correcting them. But she could teach them to help themselves. She spent the winter of 1918 writing, taking her father's journal and expanding it, adding her own observations, her own measurements, her own hard-won knowledge. She created a manual, practical, detailed, illustrated with diagrams drawn in her careful hand. By spring of 1919, she had 50 pages. By summer, 100. By autumn, the manual was complete. 200 pages of condensed knowledge about earth-sheltered construction, thermodynamics, and survival in mountain winters. Silas read it and insisted on writing the foreword. "I spent 40 years building cabins the hard way," he wrote. "I thought I knew everything there was to know about keeping people alive in these mountains. Then, a 15-year-old girl with her dead father's notebook taught me I knew nothing. This manual contains the wisdom I should have sought decades ago. The wisdom that would have saved my daughter. That did save my grandson. Read it, learn from it, build from it. And thank God that Callum Thorne had the foresight to write it down, and the daughter brave enough to prove it works." They printed 100 copies at a press 3 counties over. The cost nearly bankrupted Willa. She spent every penny she had saved from the small consulting fees families had paid her. The manuals sold out in 6 weeks. They printed 500 more. By 1920, Willa Thorne's name was known in 17 counties. The girl who lived in the mountain. The girl who had revolutionized winter survival in Appalachia. She was 18 years old, and she was exhausted. The constant teaching, the traveling to other valleys, the questions and consultations and desperate families begging for help. It never stopped. She fell asleep reading letters, woke up to more letters. Every family that successfully built an earth-sheltered cabin wrote to thank her. Every family that failed wrote asking what went wrong. She answered every letter, personally, in her careful script, because her father had taught her that knowledge shared was knowledge multiplied. But the cost was wearing her down. She was so tired. Silas saw it. He called a meeting with Willa and Amos and 3 other families who had become core supporters of the new methods. "You can't do this alone anymore," Silas said. "You need help, real help, an organization, a school." "I don't have money for a school," Willa said. "You don't need money," Silas replied. "You need land and labor, both of which this community can provide. We'll build you a teaching center, a place where people can come to learn, where you can train others to teach, where the knowledge can spread beyond just you." "Why would you do that?" Willa asked. Silas looked at her like the question was absurd. "Because you saved my grandson. Because you changed this valley. Because your father's knowledge deserves to outlive all of us. Because it's the right thing to do." They built the teaching center in the summer of 1922. It was not grand. A large, earth-sheltered structure on the ridge above Hemlock, half buried into the hillside, warm in winter and cool in summer, with space for classrooms, dormitories, a library to house the growing collection of manuals and research. Willa was 20 years old when it opened. The first class had 30 students, men and women from 6 different states. They came to learn, to see the original Earth hearth, to study under the girl who had survived what should have killed her, and turned that survival into revolution. Willa taught them everything her father had taught her: the science, the mathematics, the patient observation, but also what she had learned herself: the mistakes to avoid, the shortcuts that worked, the human element, how to convince skeptical communities to try new methods, how to build trust, how to teach without condescending. The students called her Professor Thorne. She hated it. She was not a professor. She was barely educated herself. But Silas insisted. "You're not teaching them what you learned in school," he said. "You're teaching them what you earned. That's worth more than any degree." The school grew. By 1925, they had graduated 200 students. Those students went home and built earth-sheltered structures in their own valleys, taught their own communities, spread the knowledge like seeds on the wind. By 1928, there were Earth Hearth schools in 4 states, all modeled on Willa's original, all teaching from her manual, all carrying forward the work Callum Thorne had started and his daughter had proven. Willa married in 1930 a quiet man named Thomas Webb, a carpenter who had come to study at the school and stayed. They had 2 children, a daughter named Iris after Willa's mother, a son named Callum after her father. She taught until the day she gave birth, was back in the classroom 3 weeks later with the baby strapped to her chest. The knowledge would not stop. The work would not stop. There were still families dying in badly designed cabins, still children with lung fever, still communities that did not know there was a better way. So she taught, year after year, through pregnancy and childbirth and the exhaustion of raising small children, because her father had asked her to, because the knowledge deserved to survive. And it did survive, and it spread, and lives were saved. In the winter of 1935, Willa Thorne was 33 years old. She stood in the classroom of the teaching center on a cold December morning. Outside, snow was falling, gentle, steady. Inside, the temperature was a comfortable 66 degrees. No fire needed. Just the earth's warmth. Just the careful application of principles her father had discovered decades ago. 15 students sat in front of her. Young men and women eager to learn, eager to carry the knowledge to their own communities. In the back row, moving slowly, lowering himself onto a bench with a grunt, was Silas Rutledge. He was 70 years old now. His hair was white. His hands shook with palsy. But his mind was sharp, and he still came to every class, still learned, still asked questions. "Professor Thorne," he said, his voice carrying the rasp of age, "before you begin, I wonder if you might read us the passage, the one from your father." Willa smiled. She knew which passage he meant. She opened the manual to the first page. The dedication. She had written it when she was 19, and the weight of teaching had seemed unbearable. It grounded her then. It grounded her still. She read aloud, "This manual is dedicated to Callum Thorne, geologist, father, teacher. He understood that the earth has a memory longer than human pride, and knowledge deeper than human certainty. He taught me to listen to the mountain instead of shouting at it, to work with the land instead of against it, to trust that nature properly understood is not an enemy to be conquered, but a partner to be respected. Everything in this book I learned from him. Everything I have built, I built on the foundation he laid. If these methods save lives, the credit is his. If they fail, the fault is mine. May those who read this carry the knowledge forward. May they teach others as I was taught. May the mountain's memory outlive us all. She closed the book, looked at the students, at Silas in the back row, at the warm walls that proved everything her father had believed. "My father told me the mountain tells a story," she said. "A story of warmth that lasts forever. But you have to be quiet enough to listen." Mr. Rutledge spent 20 years shouting at the mountain, building fires, cutting wood, fighting the cold with brute force. She looked at Silas, and then he learned to listen instead. That's when everything changed. For him, for this community, for all of us. Silas nodded, a small smile on his weathered face. "What you learn here," Willa continued, "is not just about building shelters. It's about changing the way people think, about survival, about certainty, about the difference between what we've always done and what we should do. You will go home and people will call you foolish. They called me foolish. They called my father worse. But you will have evidence. You will have science. You will have the mountain's warmth in your hands. And eventually, they will listen. After they fail, after their certainty cracks, they will listen." She opened the manual to the first technical chapter, the one about thermal mass. "Let's begin with the fundamentals," she said. "Heat is energy. Energy can be stored. The question is not whether the earth can keep us warm. The question is whether we are wise enough to let it." The lesson continued. Students took notes, asked questions, argued about insulation values and ventilation rates. The classroom was alive with learning, with the passing of knowledge from one generation to the next. This was what her father had wanted. Not just her survival, but this. The multiplication of understanding, the transformation of communities, the slow, steady work of changing the way people lived. After class, Silas approached her. He moved slowly. His grandson Everett, now 26 and healthy, walked beside him, ready to catch him if he stumbled. "Still teaching the old man new things," Silas said. "You're the one who keeps coming back," Willa replied. "Because I'm still learning." Silas looked around the classroom, at the earth-sheltered walls, at the warmth. "You know what I think about sometimes? What if I hadn't been wrong? What if I'd listened to your father when he was alive? What if I'd studied his work instead of dismissing it? How many lives would we have saved? How many children would still be alive?" "You can't think that way," Willa said gently. "You did what you knew, what you were taught. When you learned better, you did better. That's all anyone can do." "I suppose." Silas was quiet for a moment. "Your father was right about everything you know. The science, the methods, all of it. But he was especially right about you. He knew you'd survive. Knew you'd build this. Knew you'd teach. He prepared you for it without you even knowing. Willa thought about the letter, the one she kept in her desk, the one she read when the weight of teaching felt too heavy. Build it, survive it, teach them. He gave me the tools, Willa said, but I still had to use them. And you did, Silas said. God Almighty, you did. Everett helped his grandfather toward the door. At the threshold, Silas turned back. One more thing, he said. That council meeting, back in 1917, when I said I'd resign if they didn't let you teach. You know what I realized later? What? Willa asked. I wasn't threatening them. I was saving myself. Because if I'd stayed on that council and kept doing what I'd always done, kept teaching what I'd always taught, I would have died a fool. A certain fool. The worst kind. He smiled. You didn't just save Everett that winter, you saved me too. From my own stubbornness. He left. Willa stood alone in the empty classroom. She walked to the window, looked out at Hemlock Ridge below, at the cabins, half of them now earth-sheltered, at the smoke rising from chimneys, less smoke than there used to be because families needed less wood, at children playing in the snow, healthy and warm, because their homes were built on principles instead of tradition. She pulled out her father's journal, the original, worn now from years of handling. She opened it to the last page, the blank page where her father had left space for her to add her own entry. She had been waiting years for the right words. Now they came. She wrote, Father, you taught me that the mountain tells a story of warmth that lasts forever. I learned to listen. Mr. Rutledge learned to follow. And together we taught a valley to change. Your knowledge saved my life. But more than that, it saved this community. It spread to other communities. It became something bigger than either of us. Your story did not end when you died. It multiplied. It grew. It became the foundation on which hundreds of families built their futures. This is what you wanted, isn't it? Not just my survival, but the survival of the knowledge itself. The understanding that there is always another way. Always a better method. Always a chance to learn. I am 33 years old. I have taught over 500 students. They have gone home and built and taught in turn. Your work has spread to 7 states. Children who would have died are alive because you mapped a geothermal vent and left your daughter the instructions to find it. I will keep teaching. My children will learn. Their children will learn. Your story will outlive all of us. The mountain's memory is long, but your memory, Father, is longer. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. Thank you for giving me not just survival, but purpose. I hope I have made you proud. Your daughter, Willa. She closed the journal, held it against her chest, the way she had done as a 15-year-old orphan with nowhere to go, and nothing but her father's words to guide her. Outside, the snow continued to fall, gentle and relentless, the kind of snow that would have terrified the old Hemlock Ridge, the ridge that fought winter with fire and wood and desperate, exhausting labor. But this ridge was different. This ridge had learned to listen instead of shout, to work with the mountain instead of against it, to trust that knowledge carefully preserved and freely shared could transform the way people lived. Willa Thorne had built a shelter. She had survived. She had taught. And in doing so, she had honored her father's legacy and created her own. The mountain had told its story. She had learned to hear it. And now, through her students and their students after them, that story would echo through the valleys for generations to come. Not as a shout that fades into silence, but as a quiet, steady voice, constant as the earth's warmth, patient as geological time, true as the stone beneath her feet. The story of a girl who dug into a mountain and found not just shelter but wisdom, who learned that the greatest battles are not won by force, but by understanding, that the deepest warmth comes not from fire, but from knowing how to listen to the world as it truly is. And that legacy, like the heat rising from the earth's core, would never run out, never fade, never die. It would simply continue, generation after generation, warming everyone wise enough to stop fighting and start listening. That was the mountain's promise, and Willa Thorne had kept it.